Welcome back to the English BookCast. It is fantastic to have you with us today.
Great to be here.
You know, I was standing in line for coffee this morning, just scrolling through my phone.
The usual morning ritual.
Exactly. And one of those daily horoscope notifications popped up.
Oh, yeah. What did it say for you?
Something like, Mercury's in retrograde, avoid signing contracts today. And I chuckled, swiped it away, and got my latte.
Of course. That's what 99% of us do.
But then I sat down to prep for today's deep dive, and I had this really strange feeling. I realized I might have just dismissed the oldest survival manual in human history.
It is funny how we do that, isn't it? We take these fragments, these, little echoes of ancient wisdom, and we turn them into memes or, like you said, these vague superstitions.
Right.
And we completely forget that for the people who first wrote them down, this wasn't about having a lucky Tuesday or whether you should ask someone out.
Yep.
It was a matter of life and death. Literally.
Exactly. And that is why I am so excited for today. We are about to embark on a journey that, and I'm not exaggerating here, might just change the way you look at the night sky forever.
It's a big one.
It is. We are doing a deep dive into a book that is, well, it's equal parts controversial, fascinating, and let's be honest, incredibly dense.
That's putting it mildly.
We are talking about Astronomy, Selon les Egyptians, or for our listeners, Astronomy According to the Egyptians by a man named Albert Slosman.
This is a heavy hitter. This isn't light reading. It's a journey that challenges, it really fundamentally challenges a lot of what we think we know about history, archaeology, and the very origins of civilization.
Absolutely. And when we say deep dive, we really mean it. This isn't just about reading a few hieroglyphs.
No.
It's about decoding a lost history of the world. But before we get scared off by the density of it all, we should probably introduce the man behind this theory. Because Albert Slosman wasn't your typical tweed jacket academic, was he?
No, and that is absolutely crucial context here. Slosman was not an Egyptologist by training.
Which is probably why he saw things so differently.
I think so. He was a mathematician and a computer scientist. He even served in the French resistance during the war.
Wow. Okay.
So this was a guy who dealt in cold, hard logic. He dealt in codes, in systems, and in survival mechanisms.
Which is a very interesting, maybe even a strange background for someone who's going to analyze ancient religion.
Or maybe it's the perfect background for this specific interpretation, because when Slosman looks at the walls of the Egyptian temples, and specifically the Temple of Dendera,
right,
he doesn't just see prayers or primitive art. He's not seeing myth.
What does he see?
He sees a rigorous mathematical science. He sees data. He sees equations carved in stone.
And he drops a massive bombshell right at the start of the book.
Mm-hmm.
He suggests that the Zodiac, those 12 signs we usually associate with checking our daily horoscope.
Or our compatibility with a partner.
Exactly. He says that's not what it is. It's actually a coded historical record.
Yes, a chronicle.
And not just any record, but a record of a planetary cataclysm that nearly wiped out humanity.
That is the core thesis right there. It's a detective story, really. But the crime scene isn't a locked room.
No, the crime scene is the entire planet.
And the event happened 12,000 years ago.
So here is our mission for this deep dive. We are going to unpack Slosman's controversial and fascinating thesis that ancient Egyptian theology wasn't theology at all.
Not in the way we use the word.
No. He says it was actually a rigorous science based on what he calls divine mathematical combinations.
Combinaison mathématique divine. It's a bit of a mouthful.
It is.
But that is the phrase we're going to come back to again and again. It's the whole key.
We should also probably clarify the scope here, too, because Slosman's work is massive. It's not something you can cover in an hour.
Not even close.
So for this conversation, we are focusing specifically on the first half of the book. We want to lay the groundwork. We're going to cover what he calls the eternity of time. We're going to get deep into the great cataclysm, the migration of the survivors, and we're going to end with the mysteries of the Naja, the cobra, in Chapter 8.
Right. So if you are listening to this and wondering about, the detailed birth charts or the judgment of the soul that's in the second half.
Don't worry, we're getting there.
We will absolutely get there. But we have to set the historical stage first. You have to understand the trauma that created the system before you can understand the system itself.
That's a perfect way to put it. So let's unpack this, because when most people hear ancient Egypt and stars, their mind immediately goes to astrology.
Fortune-telling, magic.
Exactly. But Slosman, he seems to get really frustrated with that idea.
He does. He is quite adamant, almost angry about it in the text. He calls modern astrology a degenerate version of what the ancients were doing.
Degenerate, that's a strong word.
It is. He argues that for the Egyptians of the first dynasty, we're talking the very, very beginning, the founders, there was no magic in the sense of, pulling rabbits out of hats.
So what was there?
There was only calculation.
Calculation of what exactly? What were they calculating day in and day out?
They were calculating those combinaison mathematic divines, the divine mathematical combinations.
Okay, we need to break that phrase down. What does it mean?
Slosman posits that the universe operates on a strict set of laws. These laws were established by the creator, who they called Ta.
Ta, right.
And these laws aren't whimsical. They are mechanical, they are geometric, and most importantly, they are predictable.
Like physics.
Exactly like physics. The movement of the celestial bodies, the stars and the planets, creates specific, measurable, angular relationships. And these angles, these combinations, determine the flow of energy and, by extension, the events on Earth.
So it's like a giant celestial clockwork mechanism?
Yeah.
Every gear turning affects every other gear.
That's a great analogy. Or think of it like a high-performance engine. The gears are the planets, the fuel is maybe the solar wind, and the chassis, the car itself, is the Earth. Now, if the gears grind or if the timing belt snaps, the car doesn't just stop running.
It explodes.
It explodes. Catastrophic failure.
And the job of the priests, then, wasn't to worship this engine in a vague spiritual sense.
No.
Their job was to be the mechanics. Their job was to listen to the engine.
Exactly. Their job was to calculate these movements with absolute painstaking precision. And you have to ask, why? Why this obsession?
Yeah, why go to all that trouble?
Because they believed, based on past experience, that keeping the Earth in harmony with the sky, keeping the engine tuned, was the only way to avoid destruction.
And when you say destruction, you aren't talking about, a bad harvest or a recession.
No.
You're talking about something much, much worse.
We are talking about the Grand Cataclysm, the Great Cataclysm. This is the foundation of Slosman's entire historical narrative. This is the event that explains everything else.
This is the part of the book that really just grabbed me. He claims that roughly 12,000 years ago, something truly unimaginable happened to our planet.
He claims that the Earth's axis tilted.
Okay, but a tilt. Like, we know the axis wobbles, that's a known thing.
Not a wobble, not a gentle drift. He claims it tilted 180 degrees.
180 degrees. I want to just pause and let you think about the physics of that for a second.
Yeah.
That means the North Pole became the South Pole.
Effectively, yes. He argues that this wasn't a slow geological process over millions of years, but a sudden, violent trauma, a planetary scale whiplash.
But wait, my high school physics is a little rusty, but if the Earth flipped 180 degrees instantly, wouldn't everything just fly off into space?
Well, not into space, but the inertia would be catastrophic.
The oceans.
The oceans wouldn't flip with the land. They'd keep moving. Imagine the entire Atlantic Ocean rising up as a single wall of water hundreds of miles high and washing over the continents. That's exactly what he describes. He talks about the celestial dams bursting. It's the biblical deluge, but explained through geophysics.
So not just tsunamis, but a global tsunami.
Well, a global tsunami, yes. Volcanic chains erupting simultaneously because of the immense crustal stress, the atmosphere being torn apart, and the sun from the perspective of a survivor on the ground.
What would you even see?
It would appear to stop in the sky, maybe shudder, and then start moving in the wrong direction.
That is a terrifying image. The sun rising where it used to set.
It would have been the end of the world. And for most people, it was. Slosman connects this specific event to the constellation of Leo.
The lion.
Yes. He says the texts explicitly mention the lion in the context of this disaster. The hieroglyphs speak of the lion with the knife.
The lion with the knife. It sounds like something out of a horror movie.
It's meant to be terrifying. It represents the bursting of those celestial dams. The idea is that the physical shock of the axis shift caused the water from the sky and the water from the deep to unleash absolute chaos. The lion is the agent of that chaos.
Now, a skeptic, and I'm sure there are many listening right now, might say, okay, that's a cool story, but where is the proof? Where is a hard evidence for something so insane?
And this is where Slosman points to the ceiling.
Literally.
Literally. He points to the famous Zodiac of Dendera. This is a massive bas-relief carving that was on the ceiling of a chapel in the Temple of Hathor.
One of the most famous astronomical artifacts in the world, wasn't it?
Absolutely. But Slosman notes something that has puzzled mainstream scholars for centuries. In that carving, the sky is depicted upside down.
Upside down how? What does that mean?
Well, the sequence of the zodiacal signs, the path the sun takes through them, it's all laid out in a way that is the reverse of what we observe in the sky today. It's a mirror image.
And what's the standard explanation for that?
Most Egyptologists brush it off. They say, oh, it was probably a stylistic choice, or maybe a mistake by the artist, or perhaps it's a symbolic representation of the underworld, the duat.
But Slosman, the mathematician, the computer scientist, he doesn't buy the, oops, the artist messed up theory.
No. He says, look, these are the people who measured and built the Great Pyramid to within millimeters of accuracy. They aligned their temples to stars with laser precision. They did not make a mistake on their most sacred map of the cosmos.
So what's his explanation?
He argues it isn't a mistake at all. It's a memory. It's a photograph. It depicts a time when the sun literally rose where it now sets. It is a snapshot of the sky before the flip.
Or maybe a snapshot of the sky during the flip. A warning.
Exactly. It's a record. It's a stone archive saying, this is what the sky looked like when the world ended. Do not forget this.
This brings us to the geography of this story because it's not just about a disaster. It's about survivors.
It's a refugee story at its heart.
And Slosman uses two very poetic terms to describe the migration. He talks about the two hearts of God.
Yes. Ahamen-Ta and Athkapta. Beautiful phrases.
Let's break those down. The first one, Ahamen-Ta.
Slosman translates this as the first heart of God. And this, according to his research into the texts, is the lost continent.
He calls it Atlantis. He explicitly makes that connection.
He does. He argues that Atlantis wasn't a Greek myth that Plato just made up. It was a distorted memory of a real place. The Kingdom of the Elder, a high civilization located in the Atlantic Ocean. This was the place that was destroyed by the lion.
The first heart, which stopped beating.
Yes. And the second heart.
Athkapta.
The second heart of God. This is Egypt, specifically the Nile Valley. He even argues that the Greek word for Egypt, Egyptos, is a corruption of Athkapta.
So the entire narrative arc of the first part of the book is essentially the story of survivors, refugees, fleeing Ahamen-Ta as it sinks beneath the waves.
A literal sinking ship.
And navigating across a chaotic world to a new home, a new land of refuge.
A lifeboat.
A lifeboat that
Yeah.
puts a whole new spin on the pyramids and the temples. They aren't just monuments to a pharaoh's vanity.
No.
They're bunkers, they're archives. They are a civilization's restart button.
Precisely. Slosman argues that the civilization of Egypt wasn't founded by people slowly wandering in from the desert and figuring out how to stack stones over thousands of years.
Which is the conventional story.
Right. He argues it was founded by a small group of refugees who landed with high culture, high science, and a severe case of collective PTSD.
That explains the sudden appearance of advanced technology and knowledge in the early dynasties that has always confused historians.
In Slosman's view, yes, it wasn't sudden at all. They arrived with the knowledge, but more importantly, they arrived with a mission, a prime directive.
And that was?
They believed that to prevent a second apocalypse, they had to establish a civilization that adhered strictly, religiously, to the divine laws of the cosmos.
To keep the engine tuned.
If they could keep the measurement of the Earth in perfect sync with the measurement of the sky, they would be safe. They could prevent the cataclysm from happening again.
And if they forgot, if they got sloppy,
the lion might roar again.
that raises the stakes just a little bit, doesn't it? It makes the guys staring at the stars on the temple roof seem a lot more important than just a stargazer.
It makes him the most important person in the kingdom. He is the safety officer for the entire planet.
So let's get into the mechanics of this system. Because if you're going to calculate the safety of the world, you need to know who the players are. Slosman makes a clear distinction between les errants and les fixes.
Right. The wanderers and the fixed ones. Now, this is pretty standard for ancient astronomy, but with a very important Slosman twist.
Okay, so the fixed ones, those are the stars.
Yes, the constellations that maintain their relative positions to each other, they form the backdrop, what he calls the center or the Zodiac. They are the stage.
And the wanderers are the actors on that stage.
The wanderers are the planets. But here is the key difference from our modern heliocentric view. In Slosman's Egyptian astronomy, the sun is a wanderer.
It's just one of the gang, it's not the star of the show.
Exactly. It is not the center of the universe in this system. It is one of the seven wanderers, along with the Moon, Mercury, Venus, Mars, Jupiter, and Saturn.
Why demote the sun? I mean, it's huge. It gives us all our light and heat and life.
It's not about demotion, it's about perspective. You have to remember, this is a geocentric calculation system.
Meaning Earth-centered.
Right, because it is concerned with the influence of these bodies on us, on humans. We are on Earth. We look up, and when we look up, we see the sun moving against the backdrop of the fixed stars, just like Mars does, just like Jupiter does.
So mathematically, for their purposes of calculating influence.
The sun acts like a planet. It's a variable in the equation, not the center of it.
Okay, that makes sense. But if the sun isn't the boss, who is? In this system, what's the most important object in the sky?
Sirius.
Ah, the dog star. I've heard it's important in Egyptian mythology. They called it Septi.
Septi, yes. Slosman identifies Sirius as the great provider and the true master of destiny. He makes a crucial distinction, while the sun regulates the 24-hour day and the seasons.
The short-term stuff.
Right, the mundane stuff. Sirius, he says, regulates the eternity of time. It's the master clock of the universe.
This connects to something called the Sothic cycle, right? I've read about this, but can you explain why it was so incredibly important to them?
Sure, it seems a bit complicated, but it's actually quite simple. The Egyptian civil year, the calendar they used for taxes and farming and everyday life, was exactly 365 days long.
Okay.
But the actual solar year, the time it takes the Earth to go around the sun, is about 365 and a quarter days.
Right, that quarter day is why we have leap year every 4 years.
Yeah.
We add an extra day to catch up.
Exactly. But the ancient Egyptians, for the longest time, didn't use leap years. They intentionally let their calendar drift.
That seems messy. For a people obsessed with precision, that feels wrong.
It seems messy to us because we want our calendar to match the seasons perfectly every year. But for them, it created a massive long-term cycle that was far more important.
How so?
They knew that if they just waited long enough, the calendar would eventually correct itself. And the anchor point, the reset button for that correction, was the star Sirius.
So what happened?
Once a year, there's a day when Sirius rises on the horizon just moments before the sun does. It's called the heliacal rising. For the Egyptians, this event marked their new year. Because their 365-day calendar was slipping, that New Year's Day would slowly move through the seasons.
I see.
But every 1,461 solar years, the cycle would complete, and the heliacal rising of Sirius would once again perfectly align with the first day of their civil calendar.
1,461 years. That is a long time to wait for a calendar reset.
It is. But for a civilization obsessed with eternity and stability, that cycle was the heartbeat of the universe. It was the year of God. It was the ultimate proof that the divine mathematical combinations were still working, that the cosmos was still in order.
It's a completely different conception of time. We think in days and years, they were thinking in millennia.
They were playing the long game.
Slosman also mentioned something called the zodiacal light. I looked this up, and it's a real astronomical phenomenon.
It is, yeah.
It's this faint, diffuse triangle of light you can see in the sky just before dawn or after dusk. But he treats it like it was some kind of profound religious experience.
He does. He describes it as a pyramidal column of light that would appear from the horizon at certain times of the year. He argues the ancients saw this not just as, atmospheric dust-reflecting sunlight, which is the modern scientific explanation.
Which is probably what it is.
Right. But they saw it as a tangible manifestation of the divine benevolence of Ptah.
It was a signal, like a green light from the universe.
Yes. A signal that the connection between sky and earth was open, it was active. Imagine you're one of those priests. You're standing in the silent desert, in the pitch black, you've done the math, you're waiting, and then, right on schedule, this ghostly pyramid of light rises up from the horizon.
It would confirm everything you believe.
Everything. It would be proof that you were still in harmony with the divine plan.
Now, let's talk about the planets as characters, because this is where the theology and the astronomy really start to blend. In the book, the planets aren't just points of light. They have Egyptian names and distinct personalities.
Yes, and this is so important. They aren't just rocks in space. They are archetypal forces. Mercury, for instance, is identified with the god Thoth.
Thoth is the ibis-headed god, the scribe, the god of wisdom.
Right. The restorer of writing and knowledge. Slosman links this directly to the historical figure or figures who helped reestablish civilization after the cataclysm. So Mercury, as a force, represents intellect, communication, and the preservation of sacred knowledge.
And what about Venus?
Venus is whore out. She represents renewal, beauty, love, but specifically the renewal of life after the disaster.
So like repopulation.
Repopulation, rebirth of nature, all of it.
And then there's Saturn, horsearcher. Always seems to get a bad rap.
He's the furthest one out that they could see with the naked eye, the slow one. So he's often associated with distance, coldness, limitations, challenges, sometimes malefic influences.
So Saturn is bad, Venus is good.
It's not that simple, and that's the crucial thing. It isn't just Saturn is bad. It's all about the aspects.
The geometry again. It always comes back to the math.
Always. This is where the real calculation comes in. If Saturn is at a 90-degree angle to Mars relative to the Earth, what astronomers call a quadrature or a square, that creates a tension, a conflict.
Like trying to fit a square peg in a round hole.
It's like two pipes meeting at a sharp 90-degree angle. The flow of water is turbulent and restricted. That combination would be seen as a time of great difficulty or struggle.
And a trine. I've heard that term.
A trine is 120 degrees. That's a harmonious angle. The energy flows smoothly. It's like a perfect Y junction in the pipes. So a trine between, say, Venus and Jupiter would be seen as an incredibly auspicious time.
And the fate of the pharaoh, and therefore the fate of Egypt itself, depended on these geometric angles in the sky.
Entirely. You don't go to war, you don't start building a temple, you don't even plant the crops until the masters of the measure give you the green light based on the sky chart.
So you are literally ruling by the stars. It's not a metaphor.
Not at all. It's the operating manual for the kingdom.
Which brings us to the headquarters of all this calculation. The central server, if you will, the Temple of Dendera.
The Archive of Stone. That's what he calls it.
Slosman writes about this place with such reverence. He calls it the Temple of the Lady of the Sky, who is the goddess Hathor. And he focuses almost obsessively on the circle of gold.
That's the famous circular zodiac we mentioned earlier. The original is actually in the Louvre in Paris now.
Right. It was cut out of the ceiling and taken to France in the 19th century.
It was. A copy remains in the temple. But Slosman's main claim is that while the physical temple we see today was built relatively late in Egyptian history by the Ptolemies and the Romans, the plans for it, the blueprint, are incredibly ancient.
He mentions gazelle skins. That detail really stuck with me.
Yes. He cites inscriptions within the temple itself that say the current building was constructed according to ancient plans found by King Khufu.
Khufu, or Cheops, the builder of the Great Pyramid.
The very same. And what did Cheops find? He found plans written on gazelle skins by the scribes of the beginning.
Scribes of the beginning. That phrase just gives me chills. It implies that Cheops, who lived 4,500 years ago, was already looking back at these scribes as ancient history.
Exactly. Cheops was essentially an archaeologist in his own right, uncovering the wisdom of the ancestors who survived the flood. The gazelle skins imply a time before they had papyrus, or perhaps a time during the migration when they were nomadic and had to carry their knowledge on something durable.
So who were the people actually doing the work at Dendera? The ones reading these star charts?
The priests. But again, we have to strip away our modern idea of what a priest is. These were not men in robes just chanting prayers.
They were scientists.
They were the great watchers. Their titles were things like Master of the Measure and the Number.
It sounds like a guild of engineers or physicists.
In many ways they were. Their daily routine wasn't about worship. It was about surveillance. They were monitoring the sky to ensure that divine harmony wasn't broken. And Slosman emphasizes the terror behind this work.
The terror.
Yes. They weren't just doing it for intellectual curiosity. They were doing it because their entire culture carried the deep, abiding trauma of the Great Cataclysm.
It's like they were the guys manning a nuclear silo. Or a radar station watching for incoming asteroids. Is the axis tilting today? Are the angles holding steady?
Precisely. They believed that if they got the math wrong, or if the pharaoh and the people disobeyed the laws of the sky, the mechanism would break. The engine would explode.
And the Earth flips again?
Or the waters rise. Or the sun burns them. The stakes for them were not just cultural or political, they were existential.
So let's walk through that history as they saw it, written in the signs of the Zodiac. Slosman breaks down history by the great zodiacal ages, This connects to the precession of the equinoxes, right?
Yes, exactly. Because the Earth wobbles on its axis like a spinning top, the constellation that rises behind the sun on the vernal equinox changes very slowly over thousands of years. Each age lasts about 2,160 years.
And Slosman reads history backward through these signs, starting with the traumatic event itself.
Right. He starts with the age of Leo, the era of destruction.
The lion. Roughly 10,000 to 12,000 years ago, he says.
This is the moment of the cataclysm, the lion with the knife, the end of Ahamenta, the end of the old world.
Then, as time precesses backward, we move into the age of Cancer. The crab.
Or in the Egyptian symbolism, the scarab beetle, Keper.
Why is the scarab so significant here? It's more than just a bug.
Oh, absolutely. Think about what the scarab does. It finds a ball of dung waste, death, decay, and it rolls it. And from that dung, it lays its eggs and new life emerges.
It's a symbol of creation from destruction.
Perfectly put, it represents becoming, rebirth. So the age of the scarab is the era of Renaissance. The survivors have landed in the Nile Valley. The first heart, Atlantis, is dead. The second heart, Egypt, begins to beat.
So they're traumatized. They've lost almost everything.
But they are alive. They are rebuilding from the mud of the Nile, just like the scarab rolling its ball of mud.
But it's not all peace and love and rebuilding. We move into the next age, Gemini, the twins.
The era of duality. And this is where Slosman reads the Zodiac as a literal political history book. He sees the sign of Gemini not just as two stars, but as the great split in the population of survivors.
A civil war. So soon after Landa.
A theological civil war.
Yeah.
A war of ideas. He says you have the followers of Horus. These are the astronomers, the monotheists, the ones trying to keep the old, pure knowledge alive. They represent the good twin.
And the bad twin. Who were they?
The rebels of Seth. The sun worshippers.
Wait, I'm confused. I thought they respected the sun. We just talked about how they monitored it as a wanderer.
They respected the sun as an instrument of God, as a vital gear in the celestial machine. But the rebels, the followers of Seth, started worshiping the instrument instead of the creator.
Ah, I see.
They became materialists. They worshipped the visible power of the sun, the heat, the gold it could create, the sheer glory of it, rather than the invisible mathematical laws behind it.
That is a crucial distinction. It's the difference between worshiping the car and worshiping the engineer who designed it.
Exactly. And the age of Gemini represents the long, drawn-out war between these two factions. Eventually, they reach a kind of peace treaty, the unification of the two lands, Upper and Lower Egypt.
And Slosman gives a very specific date for this.
He does, roughly 4241 BC. And it's not a random date.
Of course not.
It's the beginning of the Egyptian calendar as we know it.
Yeah.
And it aligns perfectly with a major, serious sun conjunction, the beginning of a new year of God. So the unification of the country wasn't just a political victory, it was a celestial alignment. They synchronized the state on Earth with the clock in the sky again.
But peace never lasts, does it? The story continues. We move into the age of Taurus, the bull, and then crucially the age of Aries, the ram.
And this is where Slosman argues the true knowledge begins its long, slow decline. This is what you outlined as our fifth segment, the Great Theological War.
Right. The age of the ram is associated with the god Amon.
Amon-Ra, the hidden one, the ram-headed god of the city of Thebes. You've seen the statues at the Karnak temple complex, endless rows of ram-headed sphinxes.
Yes, it's one of the most iconic images of Egypt.
And for Slosman, this is the bad guy winning. This is the ultimate victory of the sun cult.
Really, because when I think of that period of Egyptian history, Karnak, Luxor, Ramses the Great, I think of that as the peak of their power and influence.
That's the material peak, the peak of empire, of gold, of military might. But Slosman argues it's the spiritual and scientific decline. The masters of the number, the astronomers of Ptah, lose power to the wealthy, politically connected priests of Ammon.
The sun worshippers take over completely.
Yes. The religion becomes about spectacle, about massive temples, about wealth and empire, not about the humble, painstaking calculation of the sky to ensure survival.
He does a really interesting thing with the etymology of words here. He breaks down the word pharaoh.
He does, and it's fascinating. He says the original title was Per-Aha,
Which means?
descendants of the elder. The elder being Osiris, the original ancestor king from the lost continent. This title implies a lineage of knowledge of sacred astronomy.
And he contrasts that with a later title, Per-Amen.
Descendants of the hidden, or more pointedly, descendants of Ammon, the sun. He sees the entire arc of Egyptian history as a theological war between these two houses, the Per-Ha trying to maintain the original law of Ptah, and the Per-Amen consolidating worldly power.
What about Akhenaten, the famous heretic king? Usually he's seen as the world's first monotheist for worshipping only the sun disk, the Aton.
Slosman has a much more nuanced take. He sees Akhenaten not as an innovator, but as a reactionary. He sees him as making a desperate last-ditch attempt to restore the old worship of the solar instrument, the Aton, to fight back against the corrupted, all-powerful Amon cult.
So he wasn't inventing something new. He was trying to go back to a purer but still flawed form of sun worship.
Exactly. He failed, of course. The priests of Amon were too powerful. They wiped him and his memory from history and restored the ram as the supreme god.
So by the time we get to the later dynasties, the real science is largely lost, replaced by empty ritual and superstition.
According to Slosman, yes. The memory of the cataclysm fades into myth. The rigorous math becomes rote repetition without understanding the why behind it.
But the sky keeps moving. The great clock of precession keeps ticking, and we eventually hit the age of Pisces, the fish.
Or as the Egyptians knew her, Naut, the great goddess of the sky.
And Slosman draws a very, very direct line here to the rise of Christianity.
He does, and it's one of his most controversial claims. He explicitly connects the symbolism of Pisces, the sign of the fish, to the coming of the Messiah. He argues that the last remnants of the Egyptian priests, looking at their ancient divine mathematical combinations, knew that a new era was coming.
They predicted it.
They predicted the arrival of a new elder who would come to restore the true connection to the divine, a connection that had been lost for millennia.
Note, the sky goddess is often depicted arching over the earth, right? Her body full of stars.
Yes, her body forms the canopy of the heavens. Slosman interprets this not just as a myth, but as a diagram of the new sky. Remember, the axis tilted. The old sky of Atlantis was gone forever. Note represents the new configuration of the heavens that post-cataclysm humanity lives under now.
And after Pisces comes Aquarius, our time, the age of the water bearer.
Happy, the god of the Nile flood.
And this is where the imagery gets a little unsettling again, a little ominous. Aquarius is always shown holding two urns, pouring water.
The dual urns. This is critical. In one urn, he holds the nourishing water, the predictable, life-giving annual flood of the Nile that brings fertility to Egypt. But in the other urn,
The devastating water.
the deluge, the flood that destroys, the chaotic, unpredictable water of the great cataclysm. Slosman points out that the entry into the age of Aquarius, which is the time we are living in or approaching now, depending on your calculation, was predicted by the ancients to be a time of massive upheaval.
It's the echo of the past returning. The danger of the water is always present.
It is the cyclical nature of their history. They believed that time moves in a great spiral. You come back to the same point in the Zodiac, but on a different level of the spiral. The challenges rhyme.
Which leads us perfectly to the final segment of our discussion today. The Mystery of the Naja. Chapter 8 of the book. The title is In the Beginning Was the Naja.
The cobra.
Why a cobra?
Yeah.
I usually associate snakes with danger or, in the Bible with temptation and evil.
In Egypt, the cobra, the uraeus, is the ultimate symbol of protection and divine authority. It sits on the brow of the pharaoh, ready to spit fire at his enemies. But Slosman, as always, goes deeper. He looks at the shape of the coiled snake.
It's a spiral.
It is the spiral of evolution. The Naja represents the beginning of the new cycle of time after the cataclysm. It is the guardian of the sun, yes, but it is also the living symbol of the mathematical cycles of history. It represents the cold, hard, inescapable logic of cause and effect.
So it's not a fuzzy, warm protector. It's a guardian of the law, a cosmic enforcer.
Exactly. If you follow the coils correctly, if you adhere to the divine laws, the spiral leads you upward. It leads to evolution, to greater consciousness, to knowledge.
And if you don't, if you fall off the path.
If the balance, the called ma'at, isn't maintained, the spiral collapses, the Naja strikes.
Slosman seems to interpret the constellation Capricorn, which is connected to this Naja symbolism, as a profound warning.
He does. He suggests that the text in this chapter is a kind of lament. It's a prophecy that suggests that humanity inevitably loses its memory over the long ages.
We get comfortable. We forget.
We forget the trauma of the past. We forget the math. We stop watching the sky for the right reasons and start using it for trivial things. And when we forget, we become vulnerable to the next great turn of the spiral.
That is a heavy thought. It implies that ignorance isn't bliss. Ignorance is cosmic suicide.
That is the core message of the whole book, I think. The Egyptians wrote everything down on stone, built these indestructible monuments because they knew we would forget. They were trying to build a memory that would outlast the amnesia of the human race.
So when we look at those hieroglyphs on a temple wall, we aren't just seeing King so-and-so offered bread to the god. We're not seeing shopping lists.
No.
We are seeing a desperate message in a bottle thrown across 12,000 years of time.
A message that says, don't forget the angle of the earth, don't forget the math, because what happened to us can happen again. That is Slosman's reading.
It completely changes the vibe of a museum visit, I have to say.
It certainly does. You stop looking at the gold masks and you start looking at the geometry carved on the walls behind them.
We have covered a lot of ground today, a truly staggering amount. We've gone from the flipping of the Earth's axis to the landing of Atlantean survivors in Egypt, the great theological war between the astronomers and the sun worshippers, and the prophecy of the ages to come.
And that is just the setup. That's just the historical context.
Exactly. This is just part one. Slosman's book is titled Astronomy According to the Egyptians, and we've mostly discussed the history and the theology behind it. But the second half of the book, that's where he breaks out the charts and the technical manuals.
In our next deep dive, we're going to get into the really technical side of this. How did they actually cast a birth chart for a pharaoh? What did they believe happened to the soul after death? And how was that entire journey mapped onto the stars?
I've had a sneak peek, and Slosman has some incredibly detailed, almost scientific theories about the judgment of the soul. It makes the famous Book of the Dead look less like a religious text and more like an instruction manual for a spaceship.
It's going to be a wild ride.
I can't wait for that. But before we sign off for today, I want to leave our listeners with one final thought to mull over.
Okay.
You mentioned the two urns of Aquarius, the nourishing water and the devastating water.
Yes.
Slosman suggests we are in that age now, the age of the water bearer. If those great watchers were right about the precession of the equinoxes, and if their cosmic calendar was as frighteningly accurate as Slosman claims, what does that say about our current time?
It asks us a question, doesn't it? A very pointed question. Which urn are we pouring from?
Right. Are we using our incredible knowledge or science or technology to nourish the earth, like the predictable flood of the Nile? Or are we, through ignorance and imbalance, unleashing a new flood of distraction?
A question worth thinking about next time you check your horoscope on your phone.
Indeed. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive into the sky of the pharaohs. I'm your host.
And I'm your expert.
We'll see you for part 2.
Goodbye. Continuing our conversation, we're plunging back into the deep end of the pool. And honestly, deep end doesn't even begin to cover where we're going today. We're effectively diving into the abyss of time itself.
It is certainly a plunge.
Mm-hmm.
We're returning to the work of Albert Slosman and his incredibly dense, controversial, and fascinating book, Astronomy, Selon, the Egyptians, Astronomy According to the Egyptians.
Right. And if you were with us for the previous deep dive, we covered the history, the cataclysms, the migration from, the Atlantic to the Nile. But today, we're shifting gears entirely. Mm-hmm. We are moving from history to mechanics. We are walking through the doors of the double house of life.
Which, to frame it correctly for you, is essentially the university, the laboratory, the theological seminary, and the observatory of ancient Egypt, all rolled into one complex institution.
Exactly. We're going to look at the actual mechanics of how these people read the sky. And I have to warn everyone right up front. If you read your horoscope in the newspaper this morning, or if you have an app on your phone that tells you your moon sign, you might feel a little bit cheated after this.
Oh, that's putting it mildly.
Or at least you're going to look at that app with a lot of skepticism.
A lot. Slosman's central thesis for this section of the book, specifically from chapter 9 onwards, is, well, it's quite aggressive. He claims that what we know as astrology today, the system passed down to us by the Greeks and the Babylonians, is a superchery.
That's a strong word, a superchery. It translates to what? Deception, fraud?
Deception, fraud, trickery, yes. Or at the very, very least, a watered-down, commercialized, and fundamentally misunderstood version of the original science. He calls the original system the divine mathematical combinations, or in the French text, the combinaisons mathématiques divines, the CMD.
I love that term, CMD. It sounds so much more rigorous than astrology. It implies a system of laws, not just vibes.
Precisely. It implies physics.
So, here is our roadmap for this hour. We're going to meet the 42 judges of the sky. which, changes the whole concept of stargazing from observation to judgment.
A huge shift.
We're going to literally sit in a classroom with an ancient astronomy student and learn how they used a human face as a clock.
A fascinating, very physical method of observation.
Then we'll try to crack the mystery of the 64 Kents. And I know many of our listeners know about deacons, but Kents are a whole different beast.
A completely different level of granularity.
And then we're going to do a practical forensic case study. Slosman takes the birth chart of the famous French aviator Jean Mermoz, and he tries to prove that the Egyptian method predicts his specific fate, while the modern method just gives, vague generalizations.
And finally, we'll talk about the golden circle buried under the sand and the prophecies for the end of the era.
It's a lot to cover, so let's start with that foundational idea, astronomy versus astrology. Because today, in the 21st century, we draw a hard, thick line between the two. Astronomy is science. It's NASA, it's physics, it's telescopes. Astrology is, well, it's entertainment. It's personality quizzes.
Right. But for the ancients, and certainly for Slosman's argument, that split is an aberration. It didn't exist. There was no distinction. You couldn't study the movement of the planets, the Urantes or wanderers, without understanding their mathematical impact on the human soul. It was all one unified field. The divine mathematical combinations were the physics of the soul.
This is where Slosman starts throwing some serious accusations at the Greeks. And I want to push back on this a little because usually we hold the Greeks up as the inventors of reason. We talk about Thales, Pythagoras, Plato. These are the heavy hitters of Western civilization. But Slosman basically calls them C- students.
It does sound arrogant at first glance, doesn't it, to call Pythagoras a bad student?
It sounds incredibly arrogant. I mean, Pythagoras is the triangle guy. He invented the music of the spheres.
But Slosman's point isn't that Pythagoras was unintelligent. His point is that Pythagoras, Thales, and Plato were secularizers. They went to Egypt. They studied in the temples. We know this historically. But Slosman argues they were never given the full master of measure and number initiation.
They were outsiders.
They were foreigners. They were given bribes or, let's say, scraps of knowledge. Little pieces.
So they got the how, but not the why. Is that the idea?
Exactly. They took the geometry, they took the calculation methods, but they stripped away the theology. They stripped away the divine part of the divine mathematical combinations. To the Egyptian priests, the math was the voice of God. To the Greeks, the math was an abstract tool to describe nature. Slosman argues that when you sever that connection, you break the system. You're using the machine, but you've unplugged it from its power source.
Okay, so the Greeks get called out for taking the soul out of the math, and then the Chaldeans and Babylonians get dragged into this too.
Yes. If the Greeks were the secularizers, Slosman views the Chaldeans as the commercializers.
Yeah.
He calls the Chaldean-Babylonian astrology a fraud because they realized that people are anxious about the future.
Which is a timeless human trait.
It's a most timeless trait. And they realized they could monetize that anxiety. They turned to sacred science, which was meant for harmonizing the earth with heaven, literally keeping the civilization in sync with the cosmos. And they turned it into fortune-telling.
Right. Will I get rich? Will I marry? Will I win the battle?
All those questions. Commercialized destiny. Precisely. In the Egyptian system, the purpose wasn't to satisfy your curiosity or your ego. It was to ensure that the divine parcels, that's us, the human souls, remained in harmony with the law of creation. It was about survival, both in this life and specifically in the next. It wasn't about what will happen to me. It was about how do I align myself with math.
And that leads us directly to the 42 judges. When I read this part of the source material, it shifted my perspective entirely. It changes the sky from a map into a courtroom.
That's a very apt analogy. A courtroom or a tribunal.
So walk us through this. We look up, we see stars. The Egyptians looked up and saw judges.
In the Egyptian view, yes. The sky is the mechanism of the Great Judgment. You have 42 zones of the sky. These correspond directly to the 42 assessor judges in the Hall of Ma, that famous scene from the Book of the Dead where the heart is weighed.
Right, where you have to recite the negative confessions. I have not stolen, I have not lied, I have not polluted the water, that whole list.
Correct. But Slosman explains the geometry of it. It's not just a list of sins. It's a celestial coordinate system. He describes a spiral. It's not just a circle. It's a spiral of creation that starts in the constellation of Leo and ends in Cancer.
A spiral implies movement or evolution.
It implies the cycle of existence. The soul enters the spiral. And this spiral is divided. You have 21 regions of the past and present. These judge the life you have lived.
Yeah.
They are the record of your deeds. And then you have 21 regions of the future, which determine your next phase of existence.
So the sky is literally watching you. It's recording the data of your life.
The sky is the hard drive and the judge. Slosman highlights the constellation of the balance, what we call Libra. In the modern zodiac, Libra is just the scales. It means you're balanced or indecisive or something like that.
Yeah, some vague personality trait.
Right. In the Egyptian sky, this is the literal cosmic scale of judgment. The soul must be lighter than an ostrich feather to pass.
Hold on. If the sky is a courtroom, that implies that the stars aren't just influencing us, they are actively evaluating us. That raises the stakes of stargazing immensely. You're not just looking at pretty lights, you're looking at the jury that's going to decide your eternal fate.
Exactly. And this connection between the sky and the soul is why the accuracy of the calculation was so critical to the Egyptians. If your math is off, if you calculate the position of the judge incorrectly, you can't navigate the afterlife, you are lost in the duat, you don't get to the field of reeds. That is why they were so obsessed with precision.
Speaking of that obsession with precision, let's go to chapter 10. This was honestly my favorite part of the reading because Slosman shifts gears. He stops lecturing about history and starts storytelling. He takes us back 6,000 years into the double house of life to show us how they actually learned this stuff.
He reconstructs a romanced, but, he argues, factually based account of a night class for novice priests.
I want to paint the picture for you listening. It's night. We're in the temple complex. It's silent. The master enters. His name is Ankh-Kahor.
Which means master of measure and number.
And the students, the novice horoscopes, don't clap. They tap their styluses on their wooden tablets to welcome him. Tap, tap, tap. It's such a disciplined, rhythmic detail.
And the master begins the lesson. He explains that they are there to learn the normalization of terrestrial calculations based on celestial movements.
Which sounds incredibly dry until you see how they did it. They didn't have telescopes. They didn't have atomic clocks. They didn't have computers. They had each other's faces.
This is the face method of observation.
Yeah.
It is, it's ingenious in its simplicity and its reliance on human physiology.
I want to simulate this for the listeners. I want everyone listening to visualize this right now. You are in a pitch black stone room. The roof is open to the sky. You're sitting cross-legged, knee to knee with another student. You are perfectly aligned north and south. You are the observer. The person across from you is the statue or the clock.
Correct. And you, the observer, have to project a grid onto your partner's face.
Okay, walk me through the grid. I'm looking at your face in the dark. What am I seeing?
You're seeing 7 vertical lines. Line 1 is the left shoulder. Line 2 is the left ear. Line 3 is the left eye. Line 4 is the middle of the meridian.
That's the center line, the most important one.
The axis of the world, effectively.
Yeah.
Then line 5 is the right eye. Line 6, the right ear. And line 7, the right shoulder.
So I'm watching a specific star, let's say Sirius, rising behind you.
Yes. You see the star appear over the left shoulder. That is the entrance. You don't mark the time yet. You wait. You watch it creep through the darkness. It aligns with the left ear. Now you mark the first beat. It continues. It hits the left eye. And finally, when it sits perfectly atop the bridge of the nose, it is transiting the meridian.
That is incredible. You are literally looking through your friend to see the universe. It's so intimate. And the discipline. If the guy across from you sneezes or slumps or scratches his nose.
The calculation for the entire night is ruined. The clock had to be as still as stone. It required absolute physical control.
And Slosman mentions that this wasn't just about noting the time for the sake of it. It was about syncing the calendar. And this is where the math gets a little tricky and where I think the divine part comes in again. We know the solar year is roughly 365 and a quarter days long.
Right. That is the physical reality of the solar orbit. It's messy.
But the Egyptians were obsessed with the geometry. A circle has 360 degrees, so they had a problem. The time, 365, didn't match the space, 360.
A mismatch between the ideal and the real. So the Egyptians used a 360-day astronomical year for their calculations.
360 days, so they were missing 5 days. What happened to them?
They weren't missing them. They deliberately set them aside. These were the epigomenal days, days outside of time.
This is a concept I struggle with. How can you just have days that don't count?
Well, think of it like this. You have a perfect geometrical system where 1 degree of the sky equals exactly 1 day of the year. 360 degrees, 360 days. Perfect harmony. But the sun is messy. The sun takes an extra 5 1/4 days.
The troublemaker.
Right. So at the end of the year, you have this gap. The Egyptians treated these 5 days as a separate entity. They were the birthdays of the netter. The gods Osiris, Horus, Seth, Isis, and Nephthys.
So they were holidays, like a big party at the end of the year.
They were dangerous days, chaos days. The law of the circle was suspended. If you were doing mathematical calculations for the soul, you didn't include these days. They were the glitch in the matrix that had to be accounted for separately to keep the sacred geometry pure.
It's like a leap year. But instead of one day every 4 years just to fix the calendar, they took the 5 messy days every single year and said, these belong to the gods, not to the math.
Exactly. It allowed them to maintain that as above, so below perfection. The circle of the sky, 360 degrees, matched the circle of the year, 360 days.
There's another rule the master teaches the students in this chapter, the 15-degree rule.
Yes, this is a very practical observation rule. A star was not considered visible or relevant for calculation until it was 15 degrees above the horizon.
Why ignore the star when it's just rising? What's wrong with the horizon?
Atmospheric refraction. The haze near the horizon makes the position of the star wobble. It distorts the light. It's unreliable data. The Egyptians demanded absolute precision. If the data was corrupted by the atmosphere, it didn't count. They only dealt in certainty.
Wow, I just imagine being a teenager in ancient Egypt, sitting in the dark, staring at my friend's nose, trying to calculate the fate of the soul based on a star rising over his left ear, knowing that if I mess up, I'm distorting the judgment of the dead. It's a different kind of education than, here's a worksheet, do your best.
It was an education in cosmic responsibility. They were being trained to be horoscopes, which Slosman translates not as fortune chart, but as guardians of the hours. They were the keepers of the timeline of the universe.
Guardians of the hours. I like that. Okay, so they've mastered the face clock. They understand the 360-day grid. Now we need to talk about the map they are reading. And this brings us to the golden circle and the concept of space versus time. This is the great axiom that separates their astrology from ours.
This is the crux of the technical argument. Slosman says you must, absolutely must, differentiate between space, which is the sky, the constellations, and time, which is the Earth's rotation, the houses.
Okay, let's unpack this because this is where modern astrology usually loses people. In modern astrology, you have 12 signs, right? Aries, Taurus, Gemini, and they are all perfectly equal slices of the pie, 30 degrees each.
That's the modern convention. It's a standardized ruler. It's clean.
But Slosman says, look at the sky. Actually, look at it. Is the constellation of Cancer the same size as the constellation of Virgo?
Definitely not. Not even close. If you look at the actual stars, Virgo is massive. It's a huge, sprawling figure. It takes up a large chunk of the ecliptic. Cancer is tiny. It's faint. It's almost insignificant visually. Slosman calls this the principle of unequal constellations.
So the reality of the sky is unequal. The map has to match the territory.
Yes. If the sun spends 45 days passing in front of Virgo, then Virgo is a 45-day sign. If it spends only a few weeks in Cancer, it's a short sign. The Egyptians acknowledged the reality of the sky.
But the houses on Earth are equal. Why?
Precisely. The 12 houses, which represent sectors of life like marriage, money, death, are based on the Earth's rotation. That's time. Since the Earth rotates at a steady, constant speed, those houses are mathematically equal, 30 degrees each.
So we have equal houses for time and unequal signs for space.
Correct. And here is the fraud or the superchery of the Greeks. Slosman argues that the Greeks, specifically figures like Hipparchus and later Ptolemy, wanted to make the math easier. They didn't like the messiness of unequal constellations, so they standardized the zodiac. They forced the unequal stars into equal 30-degree boxes.
They used a bent ruler. They just rounded up.
They streamlined it for convenience. And in doing so, Slosman argues, they broke the link to the true divine combinations. You are getting a reading based on a map that doesn't match the territory. You're calculating a person's soul based on where a star should be in a perfect model, rather than where the star actually is in the sky.
That is a massive distinction. It's like navigating a ship using a map where the continents have been resized to look pretty. You're going to crash.
And that is exactly Slosman's point. Modern astrology is a crash course. He even mentions the symbolism of the double lion. Acre, one looking east to yesterday and one west to tomorrow. They knew the Earth moved, causing the illusion of a moving sky. They separated Earth's motion from the sky's reality.
Right. And this gets even more granular when we talk about decans. I've heard of decans. That's when you divide a sign into 3 parts, right? So if you're a Leo, you're a first decan Leo, second decan, etc.
Yes, usually 10 degrees each, 36 decans in total. It adds a layer of nuance to modern astrology.
But Slosman says, throw that away.
He says that's another oversimplification. He introduces the Kents.
Kents, K-H-E-N-T.
He says the Egyptian system used 64 Kents, not 36.
64, it's a very specific number. It immediately makes me think of the 64 squares on a chessboard.
Exactly. And Slosman makes that connection explicitly. He calls the Earth the chessboard of destiny. The 64 Kents are the squares where the game is played.
So the sky is a chessboard.
And the Kents are the genies or spirits of these sections. They represent the subtle, granular connection between sky and earth. He references a specific table in the book Table B where he decodes the meaning of these Kents based on images from the temples.
Can you give us an example? What does a Kent actually say? Is it just, you will be lucky?
No, it is far more specific and symbolic. He mentions Kent number 6, which falls in the constellation of Leo. It indicates, and I'm quoting the idea from the text here, a preference of the Virgin Queen for the celestial bull.
Preference of the Virgin Queen for the celestial bull. That sounds like a mythological soap opera. What does that even mean for a person born then?
It's deeply symbolic, likely referencing the interaction between the constellations Virgo and Taurus, mediated by the power of Leo. It suggests a life caught in a specific divine drama, a tension between those forces. Or look at Kent 35. This marks the end of Capricorn. It leads into Aquarius. He says this transition represents the age of the sons of Horus. It connects the movement of the sky to the great epochs of human history.
So instead of just saying, you are a Leo, you're proud, a Kent reading would be, what? You are born under Kent 6, the radiant force is active, the drama of the bull and the virgin is playing out in your life.
Essentially, yes. It is much more specific and much more fatalistic.
Yeah.
It's about your soul's alignment with these cosmic forces, not just your personality traits. It's about what role you are playing on the chessboard.
Okay, this is all very theoretical. Unequal constellations, 64 Kents, face clocks. I want to see if it works. Slosman knew this would be a hard sell, so he provides a cold case file. Chapter 16, The Birth Chart of Jean Mermoz.
A fascinating choice for a case study. For those who don't know, Jean Mermoz was a legendary French aviator, a hero of the Aéropostale. He was the archangel of the airmail service. He flew incredibly dangerous routes across the Atlantic and the Andes in the 1920s and 30s.
A daredevil, a true pioneer.
And he disappeared in 1936. His plane, the Croix the Southern Cross, vanished over the Atlantic. No bodies, no wreckage, nothing was ever found.
A tragic, violent, mysterious end. Perfect for an astrological forensic investigation.
Exactly. So Slosman acts as the detective. He calculates Mermoz's chart. He was born December 9th, 1901 at 0.02 a.m. true time, just 2 minutes after midnight.
Let's look at the chart like a detective. What does the modern or Greek chart say? The one with the equal signs.
Well, a modern astrologer using the equal sign system looks at December 9th. The sun is in Sagittarius, that's fine. But they would place Mermoz's Mercury in the sign of Scorpio.
Mercury is the planet of travel, communication, movement.
Correct. And Scorpio, it suggests intensity, secrecy, perhaps depth. But it doesn't screen aviator. It's a bit murky.
It's not the first thing you'd think of. Now, what does the Egyptian chart say?
Slosman applies the unequal constellation method. He looks at the actual size of Scorpio in the sky. As we said, it is a tiny constellation, a claw. The sun passes it in just a few days. So where is Mercury really? Because Scorpio is so small, Mercury has drifted past it. It falls into the next constellation.
Sagittarius.
And Sagittarius is the archer, the traveler, the explorer, the seeker of distant horizons. Suddenly, Mermuz isn't a secretive Scorpio Mercury. He's a Sagittarius Mercury. The math changes the man.
That fits the pilot profile perfectly, but that's just personality. What about his death? Can it predict that?
This is the chilling part. Slosman calculates the ascendant, the rising sign, using the start point from the Zodiac of Dendera, which Slosman argues starts in Cancer, not Aries like the modern system. He calculates the ascendant at 25 degrees Cancer.
Okay, Cancer rising. What does that tell us?
Now, look at the Orontes, the planets Mars, Saturn, Uranus, the troublemakers. In Mermoz's chart, calculated the Egyptian way, these volatile planets are clustered in the western houses, specifically houses 6, 7, and 8.
And house 80 is?
The house of death, the house of endings, but specifically the west. In Egyptian mythology, the west is where the sun dies. It's the entrance to the underworld.
So he's a cluster of wandering planets, symbols of movement, crowded into the house of death in the west.
Slosman interprets this cluster, combined with the specific Kents involved, which govern air and violent separation, as a clear, undeniable prediction of a violent end related to air and travel in the west.
He says the chart shows Orontes wandering into the zone of death.
Yes. He uses this to validate the precision of the system. He says, look, the modern chart is fuzzy. It gives you generalities. The Egyptian chart, with the unequal constellations, pinpointed the nature of his life, the Sagittarius traveler, and the nature of his death, the Western House cluster.
It's a compelling argument for accuracy. It's like saying, you've been measuring with a bent ruler for 2,000 years. No wonder your lines are crooked. Here is the straight ruler. Look how the lines connect.
That is Slosman's entire point. We are using a corrupted operating system, and because the system is corrupted, we cannot hear the warning signals.
Which brings us to the biggest warning signal of all our understanding of time and the future. We need to talk about Section 6, the prophecy.
The end of the era.
Slosman isn't shy about dates. He threw some numbers at us that are, well, they're very specific.
He discusses the Great Cycle. He says the era that began with the year 1 AD, roughly the Piscean Age, concludes in 2016.
2016. Okay, we passed that. The world didn't blow up. I remember 2016 was a weird year, but the sky didn't fall.
Slosman doesn't necessarily predict the world blowing up in 2016. He marks it as the end of a cycle, the end of a specific pulsation of the universe, the closing of a chapter. However, he does mention a darker date.
2160.
2160. He identifies this as the probability of the next major cataclysm.
That's remarkably specific. Where does he get that?
It connects to the precessional cycle. The movement from one age to another takes roughly 2,160 years. He warns that 2160 is the danger zone if humanity doesn't correct course.
That's always the caveat, isn't it? If we behave.
But in the Egyptian worldview, behaving doesn't mean being nice. It means following the law of creation, harmony, masat. If the divine parcels, us, are out of sync with the divine combinations, the sky, the mechanism corrects itself, usually violently. The earth shakes the fleas off.
He also mentions 1984 as a neutral period. What was that about?
Yes, a sort of pause or buffer zone in the celestial rhythm, a moment of stillness before the end of the cycle began to accelerate. But the really intriguing part of his conclusion isn't just the dates, it's the location.
The Great Labyrinth.
We talked about Dendera in the last episode, the temple where the famous Zodiac was found. But Slosman claims that what we see at Dendera is just the attic. The real treasure is in the basement.
The Golden Circle.
He claims there is a physical golden circle, a massive three-dimensional representation of the sky and the CMD buried deep beneath the temple. He calls it the labyrinth.
And he says it contains the absolute proof, the smoking gun.
He believes that if we could excavate this circle of gold, we would find the original tables, the original calculations, the undeniable evidence of this ancient science. We would find the manual for the machine.
And he tried, didn't he? This isn't just armchair speculation.
He did. He writes with great frustration in the conclusion. He claims he was blocked by French Egyptology and the authorities from excavating in 1979 and 1980.
Blocked by red tape.
Or bureaucracy. Or perhaps, as he implies, the gatekeepers of history aren't ready for what he might find. Slosman certainly felt that way. He felt he was standing on top of the greatest discovery in human history, the key to our past and our future, and they wouldn't let him bring a shovel.
It's a tragic image. The man who decoded the stars stopped by a permit office.
Or perhaps stopped by the divine combinations themselves. Maybe it wasn't the right time. Maybe the Kents weren't aligned for the discovery.
So what does this all mean? We've gone from tapping styluses on a novice's knee to the prophecy of 2160.
It means that for the ancient Egyptians, the universe was a machine, a precise, moral, mathematical machine. You weren't just living in it. You were a part of its gearing. Your soul was a cog in the divine combination.
And we've lost the manual.
We've lost the manual, and we're using a cheap, distorted photocopy of the map called modern astrology. Slosman's work is an attempt to reconstruct that manual, to remind us that the sky isn't just there to look pretty, it's measuring us.
The 42 judges are watching.
Indeed.
You know, it makes you look at the night sky differently. Not as random stars, but as a clock, a judge, and a guide.
And perhaps a warning.
A warning and a promise. Because if Slosman is right, the truth is still down there, waiting under the sands of Dendera.
In the Golden Circle.
That's a heavy thought to leave you with. Is the history of humanity sitting in a basement in Egypt, waiting to be read? We can't answer that today. But we can thank you for taking this deep dive with us.
It's been a journey.
Thanks for listening.